I'm Stefan Verstraeten, and welcome to the API Resilience Podcast. If you've ever wondered what it really is we do when we do APIs, and if you've wondered how APIs change organizations, our communities, and our society, look no further. This is the podcast you've been searching for.
I'm really excited today because I've got Stefan Verstraeten today. I got to know you very lovely a little while ago, but we'll tell that origin story in a bit. Stefan is the head of value at TomTom, and he's responsible for monetization of TomTom's digital assets. And that includes the business model design for new products, strategic pricing and product packaging, sales governance, and implementing performance metrics to measure the effectiveness of their value creation initiatives. That's all super amazing stuff that I'm sure a lot of the people that are listening want to hear about, because I think it's top on. But then next to that, you're also the managing director for TomTom Belgium, where you're responsible for building and maintaining relationships with important stakeholders. And together with the leadership team, you look after the engagement and performance and well-being of 250 people in Ghent. So you're really living this socio-technical complexity of both how do you sell stuff and how do you make money, and then also how do you deal with teams. So lots of stuff to talk about. I'm pretty sure 1.5 hours is not going to be enough. There's going to be a lot more that we can explore. Welcome to the podcast. Really happy to have you here.
Yeah, thank you, Christoph. Very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, head of value. It's such a sexy title. It's just, and I know that a lot of teams, when they're working with APIs, their API monetization is always like one of the key things people always are thinking about, because one of the reasons why they got the ability to do APIs is because there's the belief that API products are going to be a new source of revenue. This is almost invariable for almost every team. Now, the reality is that most teams don't start there. They start with just publishing their APIs and getting customers, and then the monetization gets shoved on the long term. But this is your job. You're actually living this day to day. So can you tell maybe a little bit more about what it actually means and what you do as a head of value at TomTom?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. The best way to start is also go a little bit into my backstory. First, before TomTom, I've had a variety of roles that were already in the commercial sphere. So I was a purchasing manager, and the very first things I did for TomTom were also on the purchasing side. So I've been doing commercial work myself. And then over the years, based on that, but also connecting up to many other departments within TomTom, got involved in quite a few other aspects of the go-to-market, let's say, and the revenue generation at TomTom. So for a while, I've also worked in the finance department. I've also started governance processes because we commercialize digital assets, which means that what we commercialize is not tangible. It's bits, not atoms. Licensing models, intellectual property, which also means that you've got to keep proper stewardship of what happens in the deals that you strike. So that got me in contact with sales, help them out, run some sales operations. That's sort of all crystallizing now in this role. To be completely open, the title head of value was not what was originally proposed when we structured the current role, which really works between all sorts of other departments, and I really like that. We always say that a system is more than a sum of its parts, and that all the interesting things happen in the interaction. Nevertheless, we all get role descriptions. We report to one boss within one silo, and I guess that's one of the reasons that make business hard. But I can really work in between different departments. I work with product management, I work with engineering, I work with marketeers, I work with sales, work with finance. Originally, I think the working title was head of commercial governance, pricing, sales operations. My response was like, well, then we might as well call it head of bureaucracy. I have a better idea. Why don't we just make it clear what this is all about? And it is all about the value creation and also the value capture, making sure that we get our fair share of the value that we create for our customers. Hence, head of value. That's how I get into that role.
So I'm sure that you've thought a lot about like transactions and how do you structure transactions specifically. I've been reading this book this was David Graeber, which was about, I think it's titled 5,000 Year History of Debt, which is basically anthropological review of different ways that people do transactions. And it's fascinating because how people feel about transactions and things like that. And how do you make sure that there's like the non-transactional part and the transactional part? Like how do you make sure that people still feel that they belong to something bigger if you're charging them money and stuff like that? Is that something that you've also explored in this space?
Well, there's certainly many different attitudes, I would say, towards the transactional part. I also remember, for example, when I was a young buyer in my previous company, where sometimes we were active in very competitive markets with oversupply, where you dealt with companies that were loss-making. Some buyers felt rather bad about that. So in that sense, yes. I think there's in business, I think there definitely is a lot more than just a transaction, even in B2B deal making, where you're all supposed to be professionals. For sure, there's still things like personal relationship, trust, people dealing multiple times with the same counterparts over time, and so on. So if that's what you mean, then yes, I do believe that that business is not just pure cold transactions and nothing else.
I think one of the tension points I've felt is around value-based selling, for example. Because for some people, value-based selling is what is the maximum amount of money I could charge from this customer. And like I've heard some people describe it like, well, this is a big customer, so they can afford a lot of money, so I'm going to charge them more. And I think that's the wrong way. Or personally, maybe that's one way of making money. Maybe that's true. But it feels that it's more about how do you align value between the two parties? How do you make sure that you're going towards the same direction? Is that a tension you're also sometimes bumping into with team members? Or
I would say that the starting point of value-based sales is not so much how can I secure the absolute maximum amount of value for myself. That's not how I would define value-based selling. It starts with the value that you create and the problems that you solve for your customers. But that's only one part. That's the part where internally you work on value creation and you model it out. But there is another world. I mentioned value capture early on.
Yes.
The opposite is also true. If you deal with a very sophisticated procurement organization, sometimes they come with the same approach and would try to absolutely minimize the amount of money that they pay to you. And all of that comes in the equation, of course. That's all things to work on. First, you have to deliver value to your customer. It's very simple. Otherwise, you're just not going to have a sustainable business in the first place. But you gotta not be naive. It's not like people automatically are going to give you your fair share just because you deserve it.
It's a tricky point. It's like, I'm your service partner, and of course you're going to give me part of your success because I'm your.
Yeah. Well, that's why people negotiate to reconcile their commercial differences. The other thing that strikes me in what you described earlier, Christoph, is that if you go into a transaction, completely one-sided, the risk is, of course, that you optimize for that one transaction.
Yeah.
But in many of our dealings, it's ongoing business relationships, between companies, also with the people themselves. But securing the maximum short term is not necessarily the wisest choice longer term. So that also comes into the equation. But that's all of that is part of the fun of working out commercial agreements.
How do you coach people in this? You're actively coaching the salespeople, and is it something that sometimes comes up? Like, how do you play this dance?
The advantage we have as the department that is responsible for governance is that we are the central hub for basically all of our commercial activity globally.
Yeah.
And what happens in our Asia team is not necessarily seen by our US-based team. And in a certain sense, our account managers have their regions, they have their customers, but it can be a pretty lonely life.
Yeah.
You don't always have the opportunity to compare with your peers. What you can try and do, especially for new products, for example, rather than have everyone try and invent everything on their own and get the same learnings, you try to broker that insight. And that is definitely part of the role. So we're not just there to say yes or no to a commercial proposal and that's it. We're also very active in capturing these insights. That's also how our standards emerge because the majority of our revenue, I think, is in bespoke deals, but the majority of deals is rather standard because they're not huge enterprise deals. So that is how we work in collaboration with our sales teams to propagate those learnings, I would say.
This sounds an awful lot like API governance to me. Also, like you have a central team that's making sure that there's like some style guide, some structure that is permeating, and then so that it's not one-off things, but it all makes sense of a coherent strategy. Sounds very similar, actually.
Yeah, in a certain sense. And there too, you want to balance a certain amount of standardization without necessarily killing all the creativity of individual cases. And let's also not forget that at the end of the day, you're still trying to solve a customer's problem, and they may not all be as unique as they sometimes think, but some of them have pretty unique use cases of your product. So you need to leave space for that as well.
And that is where there's often a lot of value that you can create, like in the new use cases.
Yeah.
One of the things I've been telling people is that your API program is really successful if people are doing unexpected things with it. You're able to learn from that and feed that back into the system so that you can start creating new products. Have you had similar experiences like that?
Absolutely. And first, to avoid misunderstanding, the way we go to market in TomTom is, of course, not only API.
Of course.
Other forms of in which our products go to our customers. But the location and navigation technology is a very wide space. And I've been around for a while, but it still regularly happens that you encounter some completely new use case of another way in which people use that data to solve business problems, which is part of the fun of the role, of course.
Yeah. I read this, I don't remember where it was, but I read this somewhere where they were talking about these digital interfaces like APIs as kind of like a sensing network. Oh, it was a Platform Revolution. That's where I read it.
Yeah.
I think so it's a sensing network where you can, like, people might come up with an idea and then you can recognize it, and then that can become information that you can use to steer where strategically you're going as a company. But I think one of the things that I've learned from you is, like, we were talking about value and thinking about all the different ways that you can create value. That was really, really interesting. How do you share that with your colleagues?
Yeah, this was when we had noodles, right? Yeah, I think the essence of what we do there, our team, is that the first step is to help people, and mostly product managers and engineers, think a little bit more broadly about the source of value. And when I say value, what I mean is anything that a customer is willing to pay money for, but also only what customers are willing to pay money for. And of course, the typical starting point of value thinking is more features and better specs or better quality. And our first job, and we use a couple of frameworks and checklists for that, is to help people think through what all sorts of other sources of value might be. And in that sense, I think I let you know after the previous podcast that I thought Marsh had a great example where he talked about the technical contract of APIs, but also the social contract, and that between two otherwise comparable companies, when one is perhaps technically inferior, but you can be assured that they're going to be in business for 10 more years, whereas the others has the better API maybe, but may not be around next year. Wow, the security of not having to suddenly rewrite all your stuff on a new API is something that people are willing to pay a bit of money for. And that's how you get the ball rolling to make people think more around their product, or a more broadly defined product, as to what it really is that customers want.
Yeah.
And it's that simple, but also that complex. Of course, that sets you up for needing to be very, very customer centric, customer focused, constantly learn from customers. And our product managers and engineers do that. But again, it's more creating the mental model to recognize what you hear and see at the end of the day.
Because it's very easy to just ignore something, even though it's like some of the most valuable things people will tell you. If you're not listening for it, you don't recognize it.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Like the value capturing. How do you structure that? Like, can you maybe talk a little bit about, like, if you have a new product that you're designing with your team, how do you make sure that there's fair share of value that you're going to get at the end of the day?
I think there's two parts of that. First is the homework and the studying at the desk. Once you think you understand what the value is for the customer, where you also work with product marketeers and so on, to capture that in value propositions and things like that. The next step is you try to translate that in your pricing models. And that is not just defining what the magical number is, but also, for example, what is the unit here? On the basis of what metric are we going to charge our customers? Is that per transaction, or is that a unit that, for example, aligns more closely with the way they generate revenue, or the most meaningful metric in their business? Because there you already solve one headache for them, which is that they don't need to worry about a mismatch between their income and what they owe you as a reward. Now, that is all still largely internal and theoretical. Then you actually get in contact with the market, of course, with your customers, where not only you test whether your own thinking resonates with how they see value, but where, of course, you also begin to compete with alternative solutions. And you learn from that, you iterate from that. And then the final step is the pure commercial process itself. As I said, can go from rather small contracts and rather small customers to very sophisticated procurement organizations. So together with our sales friends, we need to have those discussions in our fingers as well. So it's a bit of a spectrum of 3 or 4 different ingredients that go into the recipe. That's in essence how we operate.
Is it easier to have like when you're competing? Is it easier to have the same kind of business model and the same kind of metrics so that customers are already familiar with a certain business model, or is it exactly better to have like something different?
Both can happen. It's like if there is a standard metric or a certain way of doing things in a certain market, then in most cases you remove friction, I would say, to work out an agreement. If you're in some form of process where a customer has multiple options, everybody aligns on the same metric, and you have a different one that might resonate, it might work, they might actually prefer it, but you do give them more work to evaluate and to compare your proposal to other proposals. So there is some friction there. In other cases, you might remove friction. Again, if a big headache for them is a mismatch between how the value materializes in their operations or how they go to market with an integrated solution, and you take that headache away, that might be the thing that sets you apart from others. So that's all part of the learning that you do from the market and from your customers almost every day. I don't think there's one right or wrong answer.
And it's like especially with digital products, because the marginal price of an additional unit goes to zero or near zero, or there's some IT infrastructure. So your cost-based pricing is completely irrelevant for you. So you have to do this, which is fascinating, I think.
Yeah, you certainly have to think about this. That is indeed true for many digital products that are essentially fixed cost or rather limited marginal cost businesses. That creates a whole dynamic of its own as well. Volume considerations, that sort of thing. Also illustrates why pricing in that kind of environment, and then I mean pricing as a discipline or as a department, is very important. To go and operate on a pure cost basis, which you might do, for example, in a chemical commodity where there's a much closer connection between the cost of production and the pricing. Yeah, that dynamic can be completely different for digital products. Yeah. A lot of work is not easy.
Yeah.
But you would think I would say that, right?
It's complex.
Yeah, it's complex.
I think that brings us to our next topic, because this is how we got to know each other, right? It's like you reached out on LinkedIn. Do you remember how you found out about me? I think it was like a post, or
It must have been a post. I have this habit of letting you know what I think a couple of times about posts or podcasts.
Yeah. I love that, by
I
the
don't
way.
remember exactly how we.
I think I know. I
Yeah.
think I did. This was when we were doing the complexity series, and then I had written a list of books about complexity, and I think that probably percolated through some of your colleagues, and then you reached out, and that's
Yeah.
how we got started.
It certainly was related to complex systems and complex adaptive systems, and I'm going to trust your memory more than mine, Christoph.
Well, this one I remember. Normally, I'm pretty bad at this. But how did you get started on complexity? Because it's like this thing. There's like an in crowd. There's a couple of people that are really excited and interested in it. And then there's a whole lot of people that are like, take this stuff away from me. Like, it's just...
Yeah. I trace this back to my background. Despite all the talk that I did about value and finance and sales and the rest of it, as you know, by education, I am an engineer. And I have this typical trait of engineers of wanting to understand how things work and why they work the way they do and that sort of thing. Now, if that's the curiosity and the thread that you follow, I think sooner or later you do bump into complex systems and people like Donella Meadows and so on. What's interesting about complexity science and the reason that the nerds keep gravitating to it is that it is a bit of a framework of frameworks, or a mental model that explains why other mental models operate the way they do, even if it's probably not very practical in daily life or in business to apply directly. But once it's one of these things. Once seen, it can't be unseen. Once somebody teaches you, like, some things are not just the sum of their parts, but certain phenomena emerge from the interaction between these elements. Once that clicks, then it's there for life, I think, as a concept.
But as engineers, even as a bioengineer, because I'm a bioengineer by education, I think we were primarily educated in predictability and trying to create systems that can be measured, like bioreactors that, like, you have this input and that's the output and that kind of stuff. Also, like, I think in software or any kind of engineering, we're trying to create deterministic systems. Yeah. So this is not the part that we are educated in, I think, mostly.
That's true. You and I studied in more or less the same moment, and it's not that like this was part of our curriculum. Mm-hmm. But what I do think is part of the engineering is the need to understand, the need for cognition. And I think we typically are trained in a certain sense naively, or with an understanding that things are quite machine-like, a lot more than they are. But that doesn't take away the fact that we say, okay, this is yet another machine, be it how cells function or how engines work or software or whatever. And we look for how does the machine work. And then you go like, well, wait a minute, there's a couple of things that you can't really just dissect in different parts and analyze. But it's the curiosity and the drive to understand that gets you there. That's probably, I would speculate, also how the field started in the first place, where people tried to explain certain things and they just couldn't get there. They didn't compute.
Actually, as you were talking, I just remembered this part. So I've been listening to books about the Industrial Revolution and how it all got started. One chapter was about interchangeable parts. And for us, I think we can't imagine a world without interchangeable parts. Like a screw is a screw and they're just the same. We're so used to it that one knot will fit on each other.
That every nut will fit every bolt.
Yes, exactly. Do you think that people would have had a better understanding about complexity previously, before the Industrial Revolution? Do you think this is a new thing, that we are baffled by this unpredictability because we are used to a bunch of our systems being predictable?
Well, I think what you, to paraphrase what I think you mean, in a world that has become or had become increasingly more predictable and standard, did the unpredictable stand out more than it did before? And that might have been a factor. I don't know, this is not really my field. I have to think about that.
I was just wondering, like, just as we're speaking, I was realizing this, that maybe actually what happened was that we were going from a world where everything is just stuff happens and it's predicted or explain it, to, oh, we can actually start explaining and predicting a lot of stuff. And now we're coming back out as like, oh my God, it's getting so complex again. So maybe we went through this complexity dip.
What I'm thinking is another thing that definitely changed is that the scale of many systems has also become increasingly vast, of course. Yeah. So if you go back a couple of 100 years, it's kind of hard to think for anything at all, any system that was truly global. Whereas now, you name it, I mean, not even the internet, but media, news, global news, there probably was no such thing as global news a couple 100 years ago. So just seeing systems that are inherently have more parts is probably also relatively new thing.
This is a whole different topic, but this is like this, well, at least the second globalization wave. Mm-hmm. So we've had the early in the industrialization, you had a first wave of globalization where everything got connected. Then we split things again. Now we've been reconnecting everything again, creating global supply chains. Yeah. And it feels like we're back in another decoupling moments, at least a partial decoupling.
Yeah, for several reasons, right? I think in supply chain, at peak integration, we probably learned a thing or two about resilience of these things. Well, so not all of it is perhaps geopolitically driven, but also for reasons of robustness and getting shorter supply chain and that sort of thing. We are probably rediscovering a couple of things that we sort of forgotten about what makes complex systems brittle and fragile and
or the other way, resilient.
Or resilient, indeed.
Do you use complexity in your work?
Not directly. It's probably there in the sense that, like many of us, when you're looking for solutions, you're looking for tools, and when you're looking for tools, you're looking for frameworks, and then it's there, especially if you bring in the social dimension, because businesses are not just machines, they're also social operations, which is a whole other dimension. But when we are in the day-to-day of solving concrete problems and having concrete impact, I can't say I recall too many instances where having a nice long fireside chat about complexity science was very useful. More something that informs in the background, not something that in my toolbox every day, certainly not.
We had this when we were doing the complexity episodes. We always asked, together with Mark Burkar, we always asked people like, so do you use the word complexity in your day-to-day job? And the answer was like, not really, because that's also your experience. Do your colleagues, are they open for it?
Oh, I'm sure many of them are, and there's I'd be surprised if there aren't a couple out there that are much more well versed in this than I am. But again, it's not so much an openness. Let's face it, the majority of our days we're trying to solve rather concrete problems or working on rather concrete projects. In my experience, at least, it's rarely relevant.
There's a couple of things, like one of the areas where I've seen, we have a guest, Barry O'Reilly from Black Tulip Technology, I think is his company, but the residuality theory. And he talks about one ways that you could actually apply complexity theory to architecture, to software architecture, to create more resilient software architecture. I think that, but it's like using attractor states and basically the failure states of a system are the attractor states, which is really interesting. And then what does that mean for the behavior of the system?
Again, I'm pretty sure it does. It's known to other people who have thought about it. And again, especially if you design and manage and you build organizations, you try to make organizations run. You investigate pathologies almost, or things where things break down, where work doesn't flow, all that kind of stuff. And there too, you look for solutions. And to the extent you really want to understand the underlying dynamics, again, I'd be wildly surprised if I'm the only one that has ever heard of this or thinks about this. But again, then you come down to how do I fix this? How do I design for this? But also how do I communicate this? So you can't imagine having a town hall meeting or a quarterly business review, and you start like, okay, boys and girls, let me start by giving you this 3-hour introduction to it just does not work. You break that down in heuristics or guiding principles, or even in a more OKR type setups, like, well, here's the goal. This is what we want to do. We're going to tell you what we're going to do, but not how you're going to do it. That's sort of. I question whether complexity science is meant to be discussed on the work floor every day. That's just like you imagine a team of engineers working on the next generation solid state transistor. They probably start talking quantum mechanics every day.
Like what you said, heuristics. I struggle with this because I really love explaining how I figured something out.
Mm-hmm.
And I always follow all the bunny holes. How do you balance that yourself? Because you're also reading a lot. It feels to me that it's an ego problem, or at least for myself. There's this identity of, oh, I want to share this insight, and then. But the thing I started realizing now is that actually it's not my job to explain how I figured something out. It's my job to explain something that the other person can use.
I think the key is, and that's what I try to do, I think the key is to meet people where they are. And some people that don't have as high a need for cognition as we do, and are a little bit more in the mode of like, just tell me what to do, tell me what works, and I'll get on with it. And I don't really need to know why this works or how you got to this. That's fine. It gets a little bit trickier if they sort of take a wrong turn somewhere, and then it can become what they need might become like, well, this and this and this is why this is not really working for you, and here's the reason. So then they probably need a bit more. And some people just have that higher need for an explanation, or insist on knowing why, or they don't even get started on the work, are skeptical, and on those. They'll take you to task. Then I think you have the opposite problem. If you then don't have a good reason why, or you can't explain them why this works, presumably, then you have trouble engaging them. But for me, it really is, what does the discussion partner or the person you're working with, what do they need?
It's almost like what I found myself doing is telling like the detective story of how I figured something out. But then there's the other story, which is the explanation story that needs to be different than the detective story. And that's something I'm very busy with right now. So it's really tripping me up.
Yeah, but that's, look, don't get me wrong. I also have that need to share, because it's, how did Feynman call them, the pleasure of finding things out. And if you've wrestled with something for months or a year, and then you figure it out, or you think you know something, and you want to share, you want to exchange ideas with others. It's just that can perhaps be another community than the people you work with every day, and that you're that maybe also don't have time for that. You just want to get on with things.
Sometimes it takes a lot more time to then find out another story that you can actually share. that will, it's like this. One of the topics we've talked about recently, this idea of APIs as utilities versus APIs as products. That's what I'm talking about. It's like, because the first reaction that I got when I started talking to people about, like, APIs are not products, they're utilities, was like, Christoph, what the hell, man? I have the feeling, because also for this interview, we're very structured. I have the feeling that you're more on the structured side of things, and you work things out, and you're like several steps ahead of me there, I feel, in how do you explain people that. Is that something that you've learned, or how have you gotten there?
Well, in terms of working with people, all I bring to the table is 30 years of mistakes. Or I try to do. I'm not overly structured. I mean, most of the time with the people in your team, the people you work with, it is more improvising and jazz, as opposed to here's my script for you and I'm going to follow the latter. That's certainly not what I do. But again, you get to points where it doesn't work. Like I remember one thing that I thought about for a while was when I was in the finance team, and then somehow somebody that I worked extremely well with somehow we still weren't on the same wavelength or what we prioritized or what was important and to be delivered on time and what could wait and what have you. It just did not. I mean, we were talking past each other. And then you go and you look for the answer. Then I actually found one of these, do the 20 question test, and we will tell you what type of personality you are, which usually are not very scientific. But in this case, it gave us a language to say, like, well, you see the world this way, and I see the world that way, and then all of a sudden it makes total sense. So that's where, again, it's a tool for a job, right? We had a nail that we needed to bang into the wall, so we went searching for a hammer, and we found it. And that, yes, in that sense, I can be really structured. Another project in that sense that I've been sinking my teeth in the last 6 months, and I'm not completely there yet, is marketing. And marketing doesn't have the greatest reputation as a discipline with folks like us. Don't mind me generalizing, but then you say, okay, it can't be totally wrong either. What is it about marketing that works, and what is that more like folklore and just tradition that doesn't really work, and where's the evidence? And that is follow the curiosity and fountain. And then I'm a dog with a bone. That's absolutely the case.
That's really interesting. I've been thinking about the same thing, because it's like seeding a community with affordance or with the customer side of the affordance, like that you have to like make people, well, there's different aspects like creating the markets but then also growing your share in the market. Is there something about this, about what you've already discovered, that you want to share?
I have a book recommendation.
Okay, yeah, always.
And the name escapes me now, but I think the book is called How Brands Grow. And that really did an excellent job of being like a first filter of what works and what doesn't. Now, of course, as always, the field itself and the discipline of people that have been doing it for years is going to be infinitely more subtle and refined. But I felt that I needed a layer better understanding of marketing, again, to solve a couple of business problems. And it is damn interesting stuff.
It's really, yeah.
I can absolutely recommend to people in the technical community, for example, as well, to read about negotiation, for example, which is for many people a pretty mysterious field, for many people also a pretty scary field. But it is something that you can start to deconstruct a little bit as to how does this operate, what do the good practitioners do, and what is really stuff you only see in movies, but it has no basis in reality. In general, I think it's a good idea that technical community and the commercial community understand each other's world a little bit better.
What is a good book that you would recommend on negotiation?
On negotiation, a really interesting and fun one, although not maybe the most relevant for business context, but it's called Never Split the Difference.
Yeah.
And you probably know it is written by an ex-hostage negotiator.
Yes.
And I recently picked it up because we worked a little bit on the role of emotion in negotiations. So this is not the one that's going to teach you technique, but it is, it's a cracker of a read. Very interesting. And it does give you a bit of a feel of how they produce the magic, if you will.
Yeah. It feels to me that there's a lot of overlap between positioning and value creation. Like when I was asking about, is it better to have the same value playbook or the same metrics as the rest of the market? I guess the answer is complex. I think it depends. Depends on what market and what position you have, and I don't think there's an easy answer on it.
No, although the elements are probably and what is the critical point? Is the bottleneck the sales process and making sure that there's low friction? Is that the number one success factor? Or is that not really the case? And is your customer going to be deeply engaged in working out a bespoke commercial construct with you anyway?
Yeah.
And then you can walk a different path, because then the transaction is not the critical part.
There's another really big topic that I was super fascinated when we were talking And you mentioned this you're a super forecaster. And
now you're bridging from the FBI to the CIA.
Yes.
Yeah.
And can you tell that story? Like, how did you become a super forecaster? Also, what is it, and how does it play in your job in value as head of value?
Yeah, this story starts somewhere around about 2011, I think, when the intelligence community wasn't very satisfied with the predictions that they made. And part of that was driven by the critique they'd received on not foreseeing certain geopolitical developments like the collapse of the Soviet Union and things like that. And they set out to run a research project to try and find methods, techniques to build better predictions. And they started a tournament. And when I say them or they, I mean IARPA, so the intelligence community's counterpart of DARPA. What is it? Defense Advanced Research Projects branch of the US military, I guess. So there's one for intelligence communities as well. And they opened a tournament for participating teams. One of the teams that registered was an academic team of the University of Pennsylvania, led by Phil Tetlock and Barbara Mellers. And they recruited people from all over the world, about 3,800 people over the internet, and let those people make predictions. And there's a certain, there's about 40 or 50 questions per season, per year. And it's things like, will the United Nations have 120 member states ratify so-and-so resolution before the 1st of March, things like that. And that project was called Good Judgment. The first year of the IARP tournament, Good Judgment won so they were the best performing team. At the end of the first year, what Good Judgment did was select the top 2% forecasters of that first season. And the second season or the second year grouped them together. And as you guessed by now, I was was part of that 2%. So as of the second year, we were still asked to submit our own forecasts, but we were also allowed to confer and discuss with our peers in the team that we were part of. Of course, the advantage is that you have access to additional information, an additional point of view. The risk is, of course, that you submit to groupthink and that you just adopt what everybody else is forecasting. Yeah, long story short, well, first of all, the first thing you want to see in that second year, of course, is whether your so-called super forecasters are still performing the best, or were just the lucky dart throwing monkeys of the first season. But that turned out to be the case. So the forecasters continued to perform. Same thing in year 3, to the point that the predictions that Good Judgment made, and that was not just taking the individual forecasts or the forecast by the teams, but I'm sure they also applied some wisdom of the crowd algorithms to that and what have you. But those results were better than what the intelligence analysts, even with classified information, had done. And in the end, IARPA stopped collaboration with everybody else, worked exclusively with Good Judgment, and then, of course, harvested the results of what is the profile of super forecasters, how do they work together, what are they not doing that other people do that lead them astray, can you train them to improve their results further, that sort of thing. And that in the end has been, not that I was there, but that has become part of the training that eventually made its way back to the intelligence community.
So I started really thinking about this after we had a conversation in the framework of artificial intelligence, because I was struggling with my presentation. We did a conference, AI the Docs, and I had a couple of insights that I had developed over the last year. A couple of key things like, this is something that I don't think other people easily will see.
Yeah.
This is probably a weird insight. But then as I presented that, it just fell apart. So I started thinking about yeah, why exactly? And then what I realized was that there's certain underlying hypotheses about how fast AI is going to evolve. That's those ideas we're reacting on. So like if there's general AI, if we have like artificial intelligent agents, which is very unlikely for at least the near future, but then that will trigger certain changes in the environment. And are you still doing super forecasting?
I am in a very small way. So at the end of the Good Judgment project, when it was stopped in 14 or 15, they branched off a commercial version called Good Judgment Inc., I think. I was invited to join that, but I didn't. That is a for-profit where the predictions are commercialized, and I wasn't really interested in doing this for a living. So still a bit of a community, and a couple of years ago, a new research project started, completely unrelated, different university, but this involves very long-range predictions.
Yeah.
I think it's called the Human Welfare Tournament or something like that. And it's also only 4 questions per year. So as I'm getting a little bit lazier, that's also easier to manage. So it has now completed its 2nd year. But other than that, I'm no longer active in that world. No.
I'm sure you learned principles from this.
Yeah.
Did you apply that to your job?
Yeah, I changed my mind on that recently because I talked to a magazine on that, and at first I'd answer like, no, I don't use it. But then the longer I thought about it, the more I leaned to, yes, I do. Look, at the end of the day, a lot of what drives success here is being rather good at probabilistic thinking. That is what it boils down to. Super forecasting is really nice brand in a certain sense, but it does create a little bit of the misconception sometimes that these are people that can peer into the future and have a crystal ball. That's not at all the case. The future is unknown and unknowable. And we know that the odds of a coin flip are 50-50. And you can throw 1,000 super forecasters at this. You're not going to change that fact. So the fact that you think probabilistically, certain techniques which they also teach you, and that come more natural to some people than others. But for example, if you're at a wedding and they ask you to predict the odds that the happy couple is going to end up divorced, some people might say, "That is very unlikely. They love each other. Look how happy they are, and what have you." But a probabilistic thinker will say, "Oh, well, step back. Base rate is about 50%. So I'm sure they like each other, but the answer is probably closer to that 50% than to 0% divorces." That sort of thing. The notion of make a prediction, write it down, score it, which was systematically done in a rather rigorous way in a Good Judgment, and is also a difference versus many expert forecasts that are very vague and hard to evaluate. And even if they are open for evaluation, nobody keeps score anyway. That was very different. So that is still something that I like, because in a certain sense, we all make predictions all the time, whether written down in a business case or an investment memo or something like that, and it's externalized. But even if you're planning the next round in a negotiation, you make certain assumptions as to what the other party is going to do. And some things are more likely than others. Yeah, look, again, the future is not knowable. In a recent discussion on this, I also said recently, the idea is not that we can predict as well as God. The idea is that you can predict better than your competitor, for example.
Yeah.
Or you apply this more rigorously than just throwing out there and not going back after the fact to validate that what you thought is correct or not, or in the ballpark, and then see if you need to rethink your assumptions and your models. And I think one of the great advantages that we have in our work, which you didn't have as a super forecaster, is we can run experiments. If we have uncertainty, we can set up learning loops to test our assumptions, to see how far we are from the truth. Yeah, that's not something that we could do when we were making Good Judgment predictions.
Connected to this whole AI hype thing, and it really starts feeling like the bubble starts being visible.
Mhm.
But in the very beginning, like about a year ago, it was a little bit scary. It was like
Yeah.
suddenly,
Yeah.
okay, so this is going to change everything. As knowledge workers, okay, what is it going to mean for what I do for day to day? Do you have like your own private set of hypotheses and forecasts that you're keeping about what's going to happen, or what you think might happen?
No, I wouldn't want to forecast this one. I'm curious. I am curious. I try to. I have thought, but I don't understand the technology well enough. But
Yeah.
something that I have thought about, for example, was suppose that a machine can somehow do with concepts what they currently already do with words or with sentences.
Yeah.
Because you're right, when this came up, it was the novelty of having something talk back to you, reason with you, argue with you in a way we eventually found out wasn't. But it was pretty. It was like never seen this before from a machine. But I can't. One day I think like, well, how hard can it be to have a model scrape the weapons, not scrape it for words and sentences, but scrape it for meaning. X equals Y, or this means that, or a bird belongs to the category animal. Who's to say that that is impossible, and who's to say if you do that at large enough scale that all of a sudden these things aren't gonna have understanding and reasoning and meaning.
I think it's partially this is what the semantic web movement was trying to do, is like really like schema.org and stuff like that are trying to create classifications and really structures for things. But you're right. It's interesting. I wonder if I'm sure somebody's working on this now. It's like trying to marry the two together.
Can't get all the way there, but like push it quite far, or certain fields, or what have you. So yeah, the initial hype has cooled off a bit, I guess. But I also, I mean, the technology is still so young that it would be surprising if there's no further tricks to be wrung out of it for the next 10 years. That would also be. So if there's my prediction that there will be some further evolution in capabilities.
What I would be interested in is like sitting together and with a couple of people and kind of like, what are the different scenarios that we can imagine laying out, and then in what time frames, and then what is the second order impact of these different scenarios? Because I think that coming with the API scene, so this is one of the things that I've said on my presentation and also at a meetup last week, is that to be able to have good working LLMs, you need good content. So writers and people that create content is even more important than it was ever before. And then the second one is that, and for these systems to be able to do something outside of their sandbox, you need APIs, because that's so basically APIs and documentation are more important than ever before. This is almost certainly true.
This is much more your world than mine. Christoph, I find it hard to speculate on that or understand, I guess, what would make it difficult. I don't really have an opinion, but I'll be very interested when it arrives.
I need to find a way. Where can I check this validate these hype or these ideas? When I was reading up on super forecasting, they were talking about the cone of uncertainty. With like, I don't know if or was it only in analysis, but like you have like these are fairly sure and fairly near future, and then these are much less sure and further future. So I was thinking about, can we make something like that for AI, about like key hypotheses, that what areas it will break through, what areas will it actually make an impact. I think one of the areas that it is already breaking through is spam. That's, I think, spam and hacking. Interesting enough, there's been quite some innovation there again.
Two of humanity's greatest problems. Again, it's to armchair think about other possibilities which in some shape or form are also already happening. Like if you replace words and sentences by proteins or something else. Protein folding, of course, had already been largely cracked before LLMs even arrived on the scene. But there must be other areas that still are due for their equivalent of LLMs fields. And let's be clear, even the what we have today is still pretty darn impressive. Huh? We've talked language, we haven't even talked images, video yet, that sort of thing. Odds are that we still are at the very, very beginning of this rather than close to the end of a hype cycle and due for a 10-year AI winter. I find that.
Yeah, I think there's been way hype cycles before about AI, like machine learning. There's definitely a lot more.
It's a fun area to speculate about.
It is. Also, just because, well, at least for us, it's so close. It's the impact is so big, or potential impact is so big. We had several people asking, like, so people were speculating about a time where people wouldn't have websites anymore because you could just ask your bot everything. And I think that we're now realizing that that's never, never say never, but that's a very unlikely scenario, that this multimedia thinking and information consumption, that's probably going to stay. So when mobile came up, that people thought that the internet was going to go away, or just regular websites, that everything would become mobile. So I think that kind of, you can see the hype waves flowing through it.
Yeah, which is a little bit naive if you look at it through the lens of customer journey and those kind of tools. But it's fun to figure out that the other thing that is intriguing is who, of course, is going to capture the value of the technology. A lot of this currently goes to the customer surplus, to you and I, and probably will continue to go. It's a very competitive field in a certain sense. So you could just as well make the argument for the explosion in the automotive industry more than a century ago, where there were probably hundreds, if not thousands, of car makers, and many other technologies where everybody tries to be the first, try to be the biggest, and then you have consolidation. So it looks like that will happen in this field as well.
As always, it's a great pleasure to talk with you and to follow the rabbit wherever it's going.
Thank you very much. Super interesting discussion. I think the only thing this one was missing compared to other conversations was good coffee.
Yes.
But I'm sure we can rectify on next time we meet. So thank you very much for having me on today, Christoph.
Thank you for spending the time and for listening to the podcast and for all the amazing interactions that we've had and will be having in the future, I'm sure. Thank you very much.
That's it for this episode. This episode of the Resilience Podcast was brought to you by Pronovix. You can learn more about our company at pronovix.com, and thank you for listening.